In a country shaped by its own many voices, the story of South Africa cannot be told in just one language. For 75 years, SABC News has done more than deliver headlines. It has spoken to the soul of the nation in the mother tongues of its people.
Siyanibulisa. Kukho ukuhla kwinani labaswelekayo nabangqolekekayo kwindlela zeli loMzantsi Afrika ngakumbi kweli thuba leholide xa sithelekisa no1980.
Ntwa ya go lwela ditlhakatlhake tsa Falklands magareng ga Britain le Argentina ikhutlile.
Inani labantu sekunesiqiniseko sokuthi bahlatshwe isifo secholera lapha eNingizimu Afrika selifineleke ezinkulungwaneni ezintathu namakhulu ayisishiyagalolunye namashumi amane nanye.
At a time when voices were silenced and languages suppressed, SABC's commitment to indigenous languages was revolutionary. Broadcasting in isiXhosa, Sepedi, Tshivenda, and more wasn't just about accessibility, it was about affirmation.
I thank God for the late Mandla Msibi, Tate Endushole, Sibota Hlangani. These are the people who felt that it was imperative, firstly, that you cannot direct Nguni news without understanding that language. Because when a presenter ad-libs, you'll get lost as a director. And that's why I'm saying, on our arrival there, we Petty Beki Katida. You know, I had to write a memorandum to say, we are going to cross live to boxing on Friday evening, and wherever there is a infotainment on sport, we are going to cross live. And it was for the first time that the news, after so many years that some have been there, that Mandla Msibi had total, confidence in me. And I negotiated with Gift Mgomezulu, who was an anchor. He actually agreed. We crossed live to the late Dumile Mateza from East London. The late Victor Mpiake was the director. And on that day, we were shocked because the late big bosses, just sneaked in the studio without telling us, And that crossing was one of the best because Dumile Mateza brought in both main fighters of that evening. And when we finished the news, we just heard people clapping their hands. And that's where I realized that, God has vindicated us. The most important thing that gratified my heart was that during that period, right, in the 90s, the COSA SABC television news obtained an award from Germany. Right? Masakana was still, Ngagata was still the executive producer, Tembikaso, and Notolo Khodbom, and of course the other anchors were in the news. And we were perplexed to say, how did it come about? But they said it is the most loved and watched program. And that instills so much confidence to say, be proud of your language.
Paul Mulife, one of SABC's early technical directors, remembers not just the broadcast, but the people behind them, the language champions who shaped South Africa's landscape.
I must give accolades to the late Mandla Msibi, Mr. Themba Mthembu, who was the head of current affairs, who is now an advocate, Phil Mulife, who came in as the editor-in-chief. He too inculcated that culture. And Dr. Snuki Zigalala, he actually not just transformed, our television, SABC, with just seeing a reflection of black and white. But he even made sure that opportunities were afforded to the black folks. We had exchange programs with CNN, and these are the people. Peter Matlari was there, Charlotte Mampani was there, Geb Mamponi was there, the Lady of Shope, Taninga Shope, Tandira Matisile. These are the people who were general managers. Some were actually even much higher positions. But they came together, you know, and there was chemistry. You wouldn't backbite any other, you know, to the other, because the vision was one.
Through war and peace, apartheid and democracy, one thread held firm: the power of hearing your story in your own language.
The introduction of African languages in SABC News was a quest to tell the stories of African people in their languages and bring news and anything related to them in their languages. Remember that the SABC started off as a bilingual, if you like, broadcast service, broadcasting in English primarily, and then Afrikaans was introduced. Then isiXhosa, Sesotho, isiZulu, and Tswana were later introduced. So, but in news itself, broadcasting news in television in those languages came, you know, as a quest to really bring news to African people, especially during the democracy, you know, a new democracy, and people needed to know their rights, and all of it brought in their own languages as well.
For Zolisa Sikabi, former SABC National Assignments Editor, the legacy of indigenous bulletins is also personal. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, it became life-saving.
I think during first the HIV/AIDS epidemic, the African languages, dissemination of information in African languages was very crucial in informing people about the disease itself and what they can do to protect themselves, and also to clear the stigma associated with people who at the time had HIV and AIDS, and how it could spread and how people can catch it from others. That is not about sharing a spoon or sitting with a person that was going to happen. The same applied again with the COVID-19 pandemic. The dissemination of information, you know, in people's languages was key in spreading, you know, information and as well as education to people.
But what is a voice without memory? Behind every moment we remember is someone who kept the record.
The archivist is the custodian of our traditions, customs, culture, and language and history. So it is of critical importance that our file material, our history, be preserved in our African languages. Because if we are preserved in our African languages, it gives access to everybody. Nobody is limited. And I think many other countries, you know, have thrived because they have preserved their history in their own languages. Preserving in English is good, but it is also difficult because not everybody, you know, can have, you know, the kind of understanding that others have. The question is, how do you still tell the story of Bambata Kamanzinza? How do you tell the story of Shaka Kasinzakona if you're going to, you know, if you know, to the best of your ability, if you're not going to tell it in the Zulu language? You know, how do you tell the story of Hinza if you're not going to tell it in the Xhosa language? You know, how do you tell the story of Sikukuni if you're not going to tell it in the Sepedi language? So there are things that need to be explained that we just cannot explain them in English. You know, as a man who used to be a translator, especially in church, you know, there were words that I couldn't, you know, interpret, you know, in English, you know, that they had to be understood in our African languages. So as a man who has done interpreting, you know, in trying to help, you know, people, and you know, in trying to help people understand more deeper, you know, our African languages, I've had that frustration that men, you know, or sometimes you interpret something, but you feel that, man, I could have done better if I had explained this in Zulu.
From analog reels to digital streams, the spirit of indigenous language broadcasting remains. Not frozen in time, but future-facing, evolving with every bite.
ndi khou livhuwa tshifhiwa ri a zwi ḓivha zwa uri vhunzhi ha vhathu vha elekanya uri ḽihoro ḽa ff plus ndi ḽihoro ḽi shumelaho madzangano a vhatshena.
For 75 years, SABC has been more than a broadcaster. It has been a bridge across language, across culture, across history. In our languages, we are seen. In our voices, we are heard. This is not just a broadcast. It's a sound of a living, breathing democracy.